Welcome to another wonderful Susanna Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susanna Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Changing the Bride's Mind. Chapter 1. When Sarah Adeline Dawson awoke on the first day of spring with a thrill of excitement running over her even before getting out of bed. She lay still, hands clutching the coverlet, blinking wide eyes at the ceiling above her, still invisible in the darkness. It was too early in the year, yet, for mornings to be bright at the time that she started her day. Smiling faintly at the feeling, she puzzled over it all the same, until the memory of what the day held for her returned to her with a suddenness that sent her flying out of bed and reaching for her best dress. Today was the day that the last 6 months had been leading up to. Today was the day that she would meet the man she was going to marry. Well, meet wasn't quite the word, she had to admit to herself, as she wriggled out of her nightdress and hastily splashed her face with water at the wash basin, dancing on her toes at the brisk cold. She would find out who he was, his name, where he lived, his occupation, and other details such as that. The sort of thing that most girls knew about their intended husbands well before they agreed to become wives, but then, most girls did not apply to become mail-order brides to complete strangers. Most girls were not Sally Dawson. And lucky for them that they weren't, she thought ruefully as she tried vainly to tame her exuberant red hair. It was even more exuberant than usual this morning, almost as though it knew that something exciting would occur later that afternoon. In the meantime, however, Mrs. Jones expected that her girls would appear for work promptly on time, neatly dressed in their uniforms, and with hair modestly hidden underneath the white cap that had been standard issue for the maids the old Newtonian ever since its founding, some 40-odd years before. Vaguely, Sally pondered the thought of the aged edifice that had been her place of work ever since she was 14 and had taken a position alongside her mother, scrubbing floors and laundering sheets. Surely the venerable owner, Mr. Sykes, must be looking forward anxiously to the 50-year anniversary of the hotel. A mere 40-odd was nowhere near as dignified. She knew herself to be just about the most undignified person working at the old hotel. If she hadn't known it innately, the frowning stares of Mrs. Jones and the other higher-ups would have told her as much. She was the youngest, most of the other maids were the same age as her mother, or even older, and had been working there since time began, as far as Sally could tell. None of them were tall and skinny. None of them had red hair that kept escaping from beneath their caps, or they managed to have freckles despite not spending nearly enough time outside. No, she would not miss the old Newtonian, that was for certain. And the old Newtonian would not miss her. She smiled to herself as she snatched a piece of bread from the cupboard. It would have to do for breakfast, she was in a hurry now, for the best thing to do would be to speak to Mrs. Jones before the other girls arrived to attend to their duties. What ought she to say? She'd never had to give notice at a position before. The spring morning was finally showing a little light around the edges as she stepped out onto the sidewalk. She paused for a moment, blue eyes lifted to focus on the silvery skies lining the tall buildings that surrounded her, and took a deep breath. "I wish you were here to help me, Mother," she murmured. "But you would be proud of me, I think, and that will have to be enough." She made her way swiftly through the darkened streets. The path was so deeply ingrained in her memory after so many years that she hardly had to think of which turns to take, which blocks to turn down, which corners to watch for hansom cabs. She wouldn't miss New York either, she told herself as she made her way through the bustling crowds of other early morning workers, in as much of a hurry as she was herself, but she knew the truth in her heart. It was impossible to spend one's whole life somewhere and not carry some fondness for it, long after you've left it behind. But, she promised herself, she would have far more to grow fond of when she got where she was going, wherever that turned out to be. Her plan to arrive at the old Newtonian ahead of the rest of her fellow workers was successful. She reached the service entrance just as the sound of the lock snicking open came to her ears. The door was pushed open and Mrs. Jones glanced out, her habitual suspicious frown already in place. Sally gave her a determined smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Jones." "Ah, Miss Dawson." The middle-aged woman raised an eyebrow. You're quite a bit earlier than your usual, aren't you? There was a clear note of disapproval in her tone, but Sally decided to ignore it. Today, this day of all days, the head housekeeper's opinion of her didn't matter in the least. Besides, she'd never been late for work a single day since she had started. No, she might not be there quite as early as some others usually were, but she was always ready to begin work promptly at 7, rain or shine. I wondered if I might speak with you, Mrs. Jones. The suspicious frown remained where it was, but the housekeeper nodded and stepped back, gesturing for Sally to follow her. Sally closed the door behind them and trailed in Mrs. Jones' wake until they reached her office, where the head housekeeper took a seat behind her desk and folded her hands in front of her. Now, then, Miss Dawson. What is it? Suddenly, faced with the impossibility of backing down now, Sally's heart began to race. She took a deep breath to compose herself and laced her fingers together demurely in front of her. I'm going to be married, she said. Mrs. Jones' eyes widened to an alarming degree. I beg your pardon? I'm about to become an engaged woman, Mrs. Jones. You don't mean to tell me that you have been cavorting with some fellow under my very nose? Miss Dawson, you know very well that Mr. Sykes disapproves of employing married women as maids. And I find it quite unconscionable, when they have their own homes to be caring for. She frowned more heavily. Perhaps you think that because your mother served as a maid here after your birth that you might be an exception yourself, but rest assured, it was a rare occurrence and only due to the fact of her widowhood. I know, Mrs. Jones, Sally said, taking care to keep her voice meek, even though she was rather inclined to throw her head back and retort something rather rude. After all, Mrs. Jones herself was a married woman. Her husband brought her tea cakes once a week, dutifully depositing them on her desk. But presumably the concern about maids caring for their own homes did not extend to the head housekeeper. I mention it only because it ought to explain why I am giving notice. Today will be my last day here at the Old Newtonian. The housekeeper stared at her for a moment, and then gave a sigh as though the weight of the world were on her shoulders. Dear me, she said. I almost hesitate to ask, Miss Dawson, I suppose it is none of my business, but after all, Mr. Sykes does depend upon me to run his establishment with absolute repute. I must ensure that there will be no unpleasantness about this rather sudden decision. It took a moment for Sally to understand what the housekeeper was referring to, and when she did, a blush spread over her face. No, of course not, she said hastily. As a matter of fact, I've never even met the man I'm going to marry. I'm not even sure of his name yet. If Sally thought that Mrs. Jones' eyes were in danger of leaping out of her skull from astonishment a moment before, she began seriously to worry as the older woman's orbs seemed to become perfectly round. I beg your pardon? That strikes me as most unorthodox. It isn't as though you have family to make arrangements for you. Sally flinched. It was true, of course, but that did not make it any less painful to hear. No, quite. I applied some months ago to be considered as a mail-order bride. A matrimonial agency has agreed to place me, and I will find out where I am to live and who I am to marry this very afternoon. I've been told that the placement will be made at once, and that I must be ready to buy a ticket west as soon as possible. Mrs. Jones shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving Sally's face. Dear me, she said. I never would have expected it of one of my girls. Married to a complete stranger. I don't know what I shall say to Mr. Sykes. Sally frowned a little. Need you tell him at all? I mean, of course if you feel you must, she amended at the look of outrage from her erstwhile superior. But surely you can just tell him that I'm leaving to be married. Does it matter that the matrimonial agency has decided who shall be my husband? Well, if it comes down to it, demanded Mrs. Jones spiritedly, if you really do want to be married, Miss Dawson, why not one of the fine young gentlemen in New York? I speak of those within your social circle, of course. Why must you seek a husband elsewhere? Mrs. Jones, surely you know that I have no social circle. Mrs. Jones gave an elegant shrug. Sally recognized this as signifying that she wanted to disagree but was not able to with any truthfulness. She went on. Besides, even if I knew some fine young gentleman from whom to select a husband, I'm not foolish enough to think that any of them would want to marry me. Mrs. Jones sighed. It is true, she said, that certain of your traits and qualities might leave you somewhat lacking as a wife. But surely there must be at least one man in New York who is willing to overlook red hair and freckles. You are not unpretty, apart from that. It was easily the most awkward compliment Sally had ever received, and she had received a fair few in her 23 years. She spoke up hastily. It isn't that, Mrs. Jones. My looks, well, we can set that aside, as far as I am concerned. No, it is my social circle that is the problem, or rather lack of one. I'm not silly enough to believe that I have the right to a social standing. I'm a maid, after all, and the daughter of a maid, with no family to speak up for me or to provide the funds I would need to leave the workforce for any reason other than to marry. She sighed, wishing that Mrs. Jones would simply understand without having to be explained to, or, more to the point, that she would simply stop pressing for more information and allow things to be just as they were. Already, Sally's excitement for the afternoon ahead was ebbing, simply because of the rather strenuous effort of dealing with her superior. And I don't mind, not really, she added. I have no intention of striving to climb a social ladder here in New York, when I have not even the means to reach the bottommost rung. And as I have no family, I have no real reason to stay here. She gave a faint smile. I suppose that's what I hope to find, by accepting the match, a family. Wherever they may be, I hope they are dreaming of me the way I have been dreaming of them. Mrs. Jones was still shaking her head, rather sadly. Whether her emotions were on Sally's behalf or simply in disapproval of Sally's choice remained unspoken, but Sally was quite sure that she knew which it was. Oh, dear, Miss Dawson, Mrs. Jones said. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. I'm quite confident in the matrimonial agency. They've assured me that there will be no danger. I didn't mean that, necessarily, though of course there's no telling with these sorts of things. Even if the man himself is not dangerous, there will undoubtedly be travel, robbers, highwaymen, bandits, Indian attacks. It will be an adventure, no doubt, Sally said, smiling. And when you arrive there, well, I hope you don't expect anything more than a marriage of convenience. More than likely you'll be married off to a widower with 10 children, only in need of a wife to feed and clothe them all. Mrs. Jones gave a genteel snort. I dare say a man like that wouldn't object to a girl with red hair and freckles. By now, Sally was reasonably certain that her superior was simply trying to irk her into changing her mind. She stood tall and squared her shoulders. I suppose it's possible, she said. But in truth, Mrs. Jones, though you will doubtless find it ridiculous, I hope to find much more than that, wherever I end up. I want a marriage based on love, even if our meeting is due to the actions of a matrimonial agency. Convenience simply isn't enough reason to be married. Mrs. Jones shook her head harder than ever, until Sally wondered at the strength of her hairpins. Well, you'll learn, she declared. You're quite the romantic, aren't you, Miss Dawson? And Sally Dawson, with her own hair coming slowly loosened beneath the white cap, one copper tendril dropping to her shoulder, couldn't help but smile. It was meant as an accusation, she could tell by the tone. But she couldn't help but feel that it was something of a compliment. Yes, Mrs. Jones, she said. I am. Chapter 2. Sally took a deep breath. Her heart was soaring, but her hands were trembling. She clutched them together to try and make it less apparent. The customer ahead of her in line finished with her transaction, bustling away from the little ticket booth. She gave Sally a nod as she went, and Sally smiled back automatically. This was a small town, people were bound to be more friendly here than they were in New York, weren't they? Besides, they didn't look at her and see nothing but a maid, paid to be at their beck and call. This reminder gave her the last little push of courage she needed to step forward and meet the gaze of the elderly fellow who waited behind the counter of the little ticket booth. He, too, gave her a smile. Hello, miss. What can I do for you? Hello, I wondered if you could help me. I'm new to town, you see. The ticket seller chuckled. I figured as much, miss. She hesitated, then smiled. Yes, of course you must have. I suppose you don't get many new faces here, do you? And you must know everyone. I do, at that, he said with a nod. On top of which, I saw you climb down out of that stagecoach with my own 2 eyes. He chuckled again. It was a rich sound, and she liked it even if he was laughing at her. Welcome to Spring Hollow, miss, though I can't imagine why a pretty young lady like you is stopping here for any length of time. Are you sure you don't want me to sell you a ticket to head on further to a bigger city, like Cheyenne? Oh, no, she said, shaking her head swiftly. Thank you. I've just come from a big city, you see. I'm here to meet someone. I had hoped that he would come to collect me, but as there was no one waiting, could you tell me where I might find? She knew the name as well as she knew her own, by now. She had read over the letter from the matrimonial agency 100 times on the journey, first by train and then by stagecoach, as she traveled from New York to the northwestern part of Wyoming. And yet, it steadied her somewhat to unfold the letter and look over the details at the top, ready and waiting to show as proof if it was required of her. Mr. Emmett Ritter, she read aloud. Of Three Birds Ranch, just north of Spring Hollow, as I understand it. She looked up at the ticket seller again, hopefully. Do you know him? The old man nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what to make of the thoughtful look in his eyes. I sure do, he said at last. Why, I've known those boys ever since they were born, matter of fact. And their parents, too, and I reckon I'll get to know the next generation just as well. You're here for Emmett, eh? She nodded. Yes. I guess you might be that mail-order bride Levi said the matrimonial agency was sendin', to take up as stepmother to Emmett's little ones. Her heart faltered a little. Was she the subject of gossip already? Perhaps it wasn't so strange, in a town the size of Spring Hollow. Everyone knew everyone, that much was obvious. Everyone must know the story of Emmett Ritter, and how he had lost his wife in childbirth the year before, leaving him with 3 young children to care for in addition to the ranch he ran. She had been given few details of his past other than that, but it was enough to have an idea of the situation she was walking into with her eyes wide open. Still, she couldn't help but wish that she could tell the story behind her arrival herself, explaining the reason from her own perspective, rather than hear it repeated to her in such a cut and dried manner, as though she were inconsequential. From the way the ticket seller told it, she might as well be a hired governess, a live-in nanny. But, she admonished herself, there was no point in becoming offended over something so slight. It wasn't this fellow's fault, after all. He was only repeating what he had heard. It might, perhaps, be Emmett Ritter's fault, but she would reserve judgment on that, even if it cost her an effort. I am engaged to Mr. Ritter, yes, she said, managing to keep her voice calm and level despite her anxiety. Who is Levi, if I may ask? Oh, he's the youngest of the Ritter brothers. I didn't realize that Mr. Ritter had brothers. Sure. 3 Birds, Emmett's father John named the ranch for his 3 boys, when he started it all those years ago. Sam's the middle one, he's out west somewhere. Further west than this? Sally murmured, smiling. She was rewarded with another gentle chuckle. Oh, you ain't seen the half of it, miss. Wyoming is smack dab in the middle of the territories, you know. But I reckon it's enough of a change for you, if you're coming from a city out east. I hope you don't end up disappointed. He gave her a wink, and she took a deep breath, feeling strangely heartened by his words. Thank you for your well wishes, she said. I hope so, too. Now, as for where I might find Mr. Ritter himself. The ticket seller scratched his forehead. For the first time a faint frown appeared on his lips. Well, come to think of it, I would have figured that Emmett would have been here to meet you. He's mighty conscientious. Maybe he's been delayed somewhere. He glanced at the sun, which was nearing the horizon. But if we're to get you out to 3 Birds before nightfall, we'd better get a move on. He looked thoughtful for a moment. I know, he said suddenly. Levi's likely to be at the saloon, this time of day. I'll walk you over there, if you like, miss, and see whether we can track him down. He'll be able to take you out to 3 Birds, right enough. Seeking the brother of the man she was engaged to, rather than the man himself, seemed like a backwards way of going about things to Sally, but in the absence of any other ideas for how to proceed, she agreed with a heartfelt thanks. Abandoning his post, though there seemed little danger that he would be much missed, as the area had been deserted after the coach that had brought Sally went on its way, he politely took her bag from her and led the way down the street. As they walked, she took advantage of the elderly man's leisurely pace to observe more about the little town she had come to. It was quite quaint, rough wood buildings, all uniformly whitewashed. Simple, but evidently the folks here in Spring Hollow took pride in their homes and businesses. The real glory of the town was its surroundings. It was, indeed, a little hollow carved out of the surrounding mountain ranges, which rose blue and purple all around them, high enough that the rocky, treeless tops were still covered in snow. As the sun dipped closer to the ridges, she drew her shawl closer around her and was glad of its warmth. It felt as though she might be in for a cold evening. Down 2 blocks, past a general store and a dressmaker's, left at the corner and down 1 more block. An inn was on one side of the street, the saloon on the other, both conveniently placed not too far from the stage stop. If she were traveling through, she might be glad of what was on offer here in Spring Hollow. As it was, she wondered whether she ought not to shy away from entering the saloon. If it was anything like the drinking establishments back in New York, but the ticket seller courteously held the door open for her, and she swallowed hard and ventured in, pretending that it was inconsequential. The inside of the place seemed perfectly respectable. It was dark, to be sure, very dimly lit indeed, but what she could see of it was clean, and there were no rowdy poker games or incipient fistfights, as far as she could tell. The ticket seller went to inquire at the bar, and returned to her quickly. Hardly even needed to ask, he said cheerfully. Ought to have just scoped out his usual spot. Say there, Levi Ritter. 3 Birds has a guest. She followed his gaze to the table across the room in the corner. A young man sat there, quite young, she estimated as he glanced up from his plate of stew and glass of what she assumed to be ale. He couldn't have been more than a year or 2 older than she was herself. His handsome face warmed with a smile at the sight of her, and he got to his feet at once. "Do we?" he said. "I reckon I know just who it is, too." "Don't tell me, you'd be Miss, what was the name, now?" "Emmett told me, I know it." "Miss Dawson," she said, with a smile. He grinned back. It was an attractive grin. "Dawson, of course," he said, and stuck out a hand for her to shake. She did, out of politeness, and found that his palm was cool and calloused, the hand of a hard worker. "Welcome to Spring Hollow, Miss Dawson. Don't tell me my oldest brother neglected to collect you at the stagecoach." "He did, in fact," the ticket seller put in, negating the need for Sally herself to make any sort of accusation. "Poor gal showed up, and no one was there to meet her." Levi Ritter turned that smile back on Sally. "Gosh, I'm awful sorry about that. I won't make excuses for him, but he does have an awful lot to handle what with the 3 little ones." He contrived to look somewhat chagrined. "I ought to have volunteered to stay home with M today, I guess, to make sure he could get away. Not that my niece and nephews are troublemakers, mind you," he added hastily. "I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea." "Surely not," Sally said, smiling warmly. "I know that things must be very difficult for them, having lost their mother so recently." There was a definite look of relief on Levi's face. "You know all about that, then," he said. "That's good. That's no need to explain anything, I reckon." She couldn't help but wonder at this statement. Did he suspect that his brother had hidden something from her? Or was there more at play here than she had understood? But she hesitated to ask, especially in such a public setting. The helpful ticket seller was beaming at her as though he were personally responsible for her safe arrival, and the handful of customers at the bar had all turned in their direction to watch with avid interest. Was it because they knew Emmett Ritter? Undoubtedly. Was it also because they knew he had brought a bride from back east to step into the shoes left empty by his wife? She decided that she might become rather upset if she thought about that too much. Thankfully, Levi Ritter was continuing without waiting for her to reply. "I reckon you're eager to get out to 3 Birds, see the lay of the land before it gets dark. Let me just settle my account, and I'll give you a ride out." "Oh, that's very kind of you," I hate to interrupt your evening." He shook his head, smile still fixed on his face, directed at her like a sunbeam. He really was very good-looking, she thought helplessly, dark-haired, dark-eyed, with square, honest features and a tall, slim form. If his older brother looked anything like the youngest of the Ritters, she would be quite pleased indeed. "No trouble at all," he said. "In fact, I'd say this means my evening is turning out better than I could have hoped." This was a clear compliment, paid delicately enough that the blush that started on her cheeks felt almost superfluous. He wasn't looking at her anymore, thank goodness. He turned to wave a hand at the fellow behind the bar, who waved back. Evidently, settling his bill was as simple as that. That was a difference, she supposed, between a small town and a city. Undoubtedly, if he fell behind on paying up his credit, the bartender knew exactly where to find him. With a word of thanks for the ticket seller, who seemed happy enough to abandon his booth for the rest of the night and take advantage of his present location, Sally followed Levi Ritter out of the saloon and around the corner to the bay mare who was tied to the hitching post there. "I'm afraid you'll have to ride side saddle behind me," Levi said apologetically. "I don't bring the wagon in unless I'm doing a supply run, and we're all stocked up for now." "Of course," Sally murmured, but she had to confess to herself that her heart was beating rather swiftly as he swept her up into the saddle and then took his place in front of her after looping her valise onto the saddlebag. At the first step, she abandoned her reluctance to touch him and clutched wildly at his waist with both hands. She felt rather than heard him chuckle, and then they were moving. It was too awkward to carry on a conversation as they went, and she was rather grateful for it. By now, her exhaustion was truly beginning to catch up with her. All she really wanted was a quick wash in a bed with sheets turned down tidily, but she had a feeling that there was much more awaiting her in the evening to come. Chapter 3. The 2-mile ride away from Spring Hollow to the road leading to Three Birds Ranch was strikingly picturesque, and Sally was glad enough to be able to put her whole attention into watching the changing landscape. At first, she thought they would inevitably ride into the foothills, but then, past a slight rise, the road curved west again and they surmounted a narrow pass that led to another valley, smaller than the one that was home to Spring Hollow. Levi nodded to it as they began the gentle descent. "All of this belongs to Three Birds," he told her, head turned so she could hear him clearly. "One of the biggest ranches in the county, maybe even in Wyoming itself." "It's beautiful," she breathed, eyes wide. She felt rather dazzled. The hidden valley spread out in front of them, the vibrant green of the spring-headed grasses turned golden by the light of the setting sun. The fields were dotted with the dark shapes of cattle. Behind them, over the mountains to the east, the rich purple and magenta of encroaching evening stretched reaching fingers. Levi Ritter gave a nudge with his heels, and his horse plunged through the grasses and found a pathway, hooves suddenly clopping on hard-packed dirt. They moved at a greater clip now, and Sally suspected that it was the horse's eagerness to get back home more than anything. Levi gave the mare her head, and they fairly flew through the meadows to the long, low ranch house that waited, set back amidst a handful of spreading oaks. "Well," said Levi, reining the horse to a stop, "here we are. Home sweet home." He swung down and was reaching up to help her in turn when the door to the house opened with a bang and 3 children tumbled out, all talking at once. "There she is. I thought she wasn't comin' today. Pa only said that to try and get us to behave." It was an empty threat. "Hi," was all the littlest of them said. Sally suspected it was just about all he could say. Toddling in the wake of his older brother and sister, he couldn't have been more than 2 years old, and he had a watchful, eager expression that suggested he would have been spouting off words as quickly as he could if he'd been able. He approached the horse with arms raised above his head, but Levi headed him off, sweeping him up into his arms. "Now, hold on there, partner. Suki's the sweetest horse in the stables, but she still might step on you by accident. You know better than to run up to her, Philip, and you two know better than to let him," he went on, directing the chastisement to little Philip's siblings. They came to a stop a few feet away from the horse and stood grinning shamefacedly at their uncle and the stranger who still sat atop Suki's back, waiting for a hand down. Levi's attention had obviously been diverted, and Sally couldn't blame him. She caught them speaking, so low that it was just at the edge of her hearing now. "She's so pretty. No, she ain't, said the older boy decisively, though sotto voce. She's beautiful. Just like Ma was. She doesn't look anything like Ma. No, but she's pretty, insisted the girl. She knew that there were 3 children, of course, the matrimonial agency had included that detail. But they had not told her their ages, or even their names, only that 3 young ones had been left motherless after Anna Ritter had passed away after a difficult pregnancy. The 4th child, too, had died before it ever had a chance to draw a breath. Looking down at the hopeful faces, all quite similar and staring up at her with identical expressions of anticipation, she was struck by what a tragedy they had gone through, and so young. And yet, where was their father? Almost as though the thought had called him into being, the door to the ranch house swung open once more and another form appeared. He stepped out into the twilight, and the last dying rays of the sun caught at his face, calling a light from the depths of his dark eyes that seemed to mesmerize her, freezing her in place. He did, indeed, look a great deal like his brother, thick dark hair, wide dark eyes with long, thick black lashes framing them, giving them a striking beauty. He was far larger, though, his shoulders twice as broad, his frame obviously solid with muscle even from this distance. The other difference between the two was that Emmett Ritter was not smiling. "There he is," said Levi, with satisfaction, and handed off little Philip to his sister. He turned back to Sally and reached up to help her down, then hesitated. Dropping his arms down by his sides, he turned back to his older brother. "I guess I ought to let you come and help her down, Emmett? Seein' as she's your bride and all." For the first time, Sally's gaze met that of the man she was engaged to marry. She caught her breath. Everything that had struck her as so handsome and appealing in Levi was echoed here again, but far more strongly. She felt a strange stirring in the pit of her stomach, a stronger case of nerves than she had encountered at any point in this peculiar journey, until now. Face to face with Emmett Ritter, anticipating his touch. Instead of stepping from the porch and joining them, he leaned back against the wall of the log-built house and folded his arms. "You're already there, Levi, you may as well." His tone, even deeper than his brother's, was a study in nonchalance. Levi grinned, sheepishly, Sally thought, and turned back to her. She let him put his hands to her waist and lift her down, telling herself that she wasn't disappointed. Even though she knew it was a lie. "Come on," Levi said, as much to the 3 children as to her. "Welcome home." Swallowing past the rather painful lump in her throat, wishing she could fight off the nerves that still attacked her, she joined the little knot of Ritters, and they made their way to the veranda. The 3 children were quiet now, in the presence of their father, but she could feel their eyes on her, questioning, curious, wanting to find everything out about this new arrival. She couldn't blame them a bit. Were she in their shoes, had her mother decided to marry again after the death of her father, she would have been desperate to know all about that new parent as quickly as possible. Emmett Ritter did not move from his position until they were all standing before him on the porch. Only then did he step forward and put out a hand for Sally to shake. She did so, biting back a nervous intake of breath. His hands were just as calloused and rough and capable as his brother's. "Welcome to 3 Birds, Miss Dawson." "Thank you, please do call me Sally." She glanced down at the children, 3 eager faces turned up to hers. They looked quite a bit like their father and uncle, only in miniature. "And I hope that you 3 will, as well." Emmett Ritter's mouth turned downwards, a look of disapproval if she ever saw one. She was rather glad that she had spoken up without waiting for him to introduce her. The last thing she wanted was for these poor, sweet children to feel constrained from the very moment they met. After all, she was going to be their stepmother. Their eager dark eyes appealed to her from the very start, and she hoped that they would feel the same way about her. Even if it was abundantly obvious that their father did not. "Well, Miss Sally," he said. "I reckon you'd better call me Emmett. This is Ethan, Maggie, and Phil." He laid a hand on each child's head in turn, with a softness that caught her by surprise, and which she appreciated. Perhaps he wasn't all about discipline and disapproval. "Come on in. I was just fixing supper." "You didn't collect her at the stagecoach," Levi said, following last as the little cavalcade made its way through the front door. Sally saw Emmett's shoulders tense. Couldn't make it, he said. But I figured she'd find a way here, anyhow. You ought to have met her, Emmett. And I was right, wasn't I? This was as clear a dismissal as Sally had ever heard. In silence, though she caught a discontented frown on Levi's face, they followed Emmett through the house to the kitchen. They passed up a dark, empty room that had a long table set with 8 chairs. It obviously had not been used for quite some time. She was rather glad of it when they reached the bright, warm kitchen, though she couldn't help but wonder at the abandoned feeling of that neglected dining room. Emmett gestured toward the kitchen table. Might as well take a seat, he said. Supper'll be a few minutes more. Levi pulled a chair out for Sally, and she took it, smiling gratefully at him. She caught Emmett watching them but could not read the look in his dark eyes. The 3 children sat across from her, little Philip in his sister's lap, all still staring at her with that eager curiosity. She smiled at them. How old are you all? I'm 8, Ethan said. Maggie is 6, and Phil is 2. You seem very mature for your age, she told him. And you, too, Maggie. Is that short for Margaret? The girl nodded, cheeks turning pink with pleasure. My grandmother was named Margaret, Sally told her. I always thought it was a beautiful name. Sally is a nickname, too. My real name is Sarah Adeline, but my mother thought Sally would be simpler. The 2 older children murmured the name back to her, in tones of awe. Sarah Adeline. It is a beautiful name, Levi said. But Sally's awful pretty too, I think. Emmett slammed the lid back on a pot with what seemed to be unnecessary force. Sally jumped, startled, and looked up at him. He was still facing away from them, but it was clear that he was just as tense as he had been before, if not even more so. She got up from the table hastily, hardly knowing what she was doing, and went to him at the stove. May I help? She said. He shook his head without looking at her. You've had a long journey. You must be exhausted. She smiled, though it was a wasted effort as he was not facing in her direction. It was a long journey. But I've been sitting for hours, days. I'd like to stretch my legs a little, if I can be of any use to you. He hesitated a moment more and then handed the wooden spoon in his hand over to her. She removed the pot lid and began to stir the stew inside. There wasn't much to it, doubtless, she thought. Emmett Ritter was not a natural cook. Men so rarely were. When he wasn't looking, she hastily added a little more salt and pepper. I reckon Levi's right, I ought to have made sure I could meet you at the coach, he said, his voice low, for her ears only. Truth is, the kids were more mischievous than usual, and one of the ranch hands was out sick. Between Handlin, the 3 of them, and seeing to Hank's duties in addition to my own, I had planned to meet you and have supper ready besides. The best laid plans of mice and men, she said lightly. It's all right. Your brother was very helpful in making certain that I arrived. Humph. And the ticket seller, I never did get his name, he was very helpful, too. Marcus, Emmett said. Marcus Trueways. He's a good old fellow. Yes. I formed a good impression of him, and of the town in general, even from what little I've seen. I think I will like it here. There was a pause, broken only by the bubbling of the stew and the animated chatter that was now coming from the dining table as the children entertained their uncle. Levi kept glancing in their direction every now and again. Good, said Emmett at last. She took a deep breath. It seemed best, she thought, that she let him know what she was hoping for, right from the beginning. Her heart was beating swiftly as she considered the best way to put it. That said, though I understand why you could not fetch me, I suppose I had hoped that we might have a more meaningful meeting, she said, eyes lowered. There was a long pause, and at last she dared to look up to find that his dark eyes were watching her, unreadable as ever. You're to be my wife, and the stepmother to my children, he said. That's all it is, Miss Dawson. There's no call to go searching for any more meaning than that. Chapter 4. Evidently, Sally thought, Emmett Ritter believed it best to let her know exactly what his intentions were, right from the beginning, too. Well, then, she said, addressing her reflection in the mirror above the wash basin. He doesn't want love, or romance. He wants a marriage of convenience. Of necessity. Her mouth twisted a little with distaste. Just as Mrs. Jones predicted. Oh well. She smoothed her skirts down. We can't have everything, Sarah Adeline Dawson. We are, after all, only the daughter of a widowed maid from New York City. Her tone was as light as she could manage, but even now, she knew that she was lying to herself if she pretended to be anything other than disappointed. She had so wanted to forge a connection, a bond with the man she planned to marry. And there was that strange physical pull that she felt when he was near. It suggested strongly that a connection could be made. But there was no point in a one-sided love affair. The only possible end for such a thing was heartbreak and despair. She would not allow herself to fall in love with a man who had no interest in ever loving her back. A marriage of convenience it was, then. But perhaps the children would be the saving grace. Already she felt drawn to them. Her knowledge of their tragic past, limited as it was, could not help but motivate her compassion for them. She, too, had lost her mother. She, too, knew what it was to feel such an important absence so keenly. It was odd how tragedies could make one feel as though they knew complete strangers as well as they knew themselves. And for their father, well, her heart wanted to believe that it had been just as much of a tragedy for him, as well. After all, he had lost his wife in childbirth, which meant that he lost not only the woman he had wed, but the fourth born of his children. She could imagine all too well how she would feel, were she in his shoes, mourning over the loss of a spouse and child, wanting to hold the ones who remained closer than ever, sharing that loss with them. But, she wasn't at all certain that her imagined feelings reflected the reality for a man like Emmett Dawson. After all, his wife had only been gone just shy of a year, and he had already arranged for another bride. She couldn't blame him for that. It was practical, to be sure. Even if it was more than a little cold. She huffed out a sigh as she put her hair up, pinning it as tightly as she could, though she knew it was bound to unravel and spill loose on her shoulders, no matter what she did. As she reached for the door to the little bedroom, she cast a final glance out the window. It was early yet, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The night before, she had been urged to get as much sleep as she needed, to lie abed in the morning. But she'd woken up at her usual time and was too restless to stay still. Perhaps this morning would be her opportunity to start to get to know everyone, she decided. The children, of course, and their father. Sally had been put up in a little lean-to that was built off the back of the house. It was only appropriate, she supposed. The children were not quite old enough to serve as chaperones in the eyes of society, and one unmarried man would hardly be able to supervise another, so Levi was out, too. She didn't mind, anyhow. She was close enough that fulfilling any household duties would be as easy as though she were already in the house, and it gave her a bit of space to herself that she appreciated. Perhaps it would help her to wrap her mind around the way things seemed to be going. Holding her breath, she entered through the kitchen door, which was just around the corner from her little room. At the stove, Levi stood, hopefully watching the kettle for the coffee to boil. He gave her a warm smile as she stepped into the room. Emmett sat at the table, little Philip on his knee, poring over a ledger that was spread out before him. He did not even look up. "Good morning, Sally," Levi said. "Coffee? I'd love some, thank you." "Oh, would you like me to do it for you?" "I don't mind." Levi glanced over to his older brother, who looked up at last with a faint frown. "Levi, we've got to get a handle on the rats in the barn. They're eating as much of the oats as the horses are." "Good morning, Miss Sally. I don't suppose you could fetch breakfast for the little ones, we're in a hurry today." His tone was not impolite, but neither was it imbued with the same warmth that his brother had shown. She found herself automatically replying in much the same manner. "Yes, of course I can do that. Where are Ethan and Maggie?" "Chores," Emmett said briefly. "They'll be in a minute." He stood, depositing his youngest on the chair in which he had been sitting, and nodded to Levi. "Let's get a move on." Levi gave a helpless glance to Sally, and then to the coffee pot, and then followed his brother out the door with a rueful smile and a sigh. Sally couldn't help but smile, too, though she wondered at Emmett's abruptness. She turned to find little Philip watching her with wide eyes. "Is your pa always like that?" she asked him rhetorically, smiling. The toddler eyed her for a moment more, and then, to her surprise, held up his arms to be picked up. It was a touching display of trust, considering that he hardly knew her, and she felt a little flutter of pleasure. "Why, I'm honored," she told him, and scooped him up in her arms, twirling him around until he laughed. As she was dancing him about the kitchen, humming to him, the kitchen door opened once more, admitting Philip's two older siblings. Maggie leapt forward, a ready smile on her face, to join the dance without question. Ethan, older and more serious, hung back, just watching. Sally chuckled, a bit self-consciously, and handed Philip to his sister. "Well, you've caught me being silly," she said. "And here I'm meant to be making breakfast for you three growing children. What do you usually have? Bacon and eggs? Biscuits? Oatmeal or grits?" said Ethan. Sally made a face. "That sounds quite plain, doesn't it? Do you put butter and syrup on it?" Ethan shook his head, but Maggie grabbed Sally's hand and tugged on it. "We do, too," she shouted. "When Ma made us breakfast, she always did. It's just Pa who doesn't." Sally smiled at her enthusiasm. "I see. Well, perhaps your pa just didn't know any better. Let's see what we can do for a good breakfast, hmm?" With a little coaxing, she managed to get all three of the children involved in the preparation of breakfast, and by the time the men returned from their earlier chores, there was a veritable feast spread over the kitchen table. Eggs, bacon, sausage, flapjacks, toast, and both grits and oatmeal, with plenty of butter and syrup melting on top. Sally, her apron covered in syrup from Philip's helpful ministrations and a streak of flour on her cheek, felt a blush coming on at the sight of the two Ritter men standing in the open kitchen doorway. But the children rushed forward without hesitation, clasping their father and uncle by the hands and fairly dragging them over to the table. "Look at all this. It looks delicious," Levi said, echoing Maggie's childish enthusiasm. "Let's eat it." He took a seat, grinning at Sally. "And here I was only expecting coffee when I got back." Sally smiled back at him, then turned to Emmett. He was still watching her with that unreadable look in his eyes, but as she met his gaze, his lips turned up in an undeniable, if rather reluctant, smile. "Well," he said, "would you look at all that?" Feeling overwhelmed by the confusion of her emotions, she turned away from him hastily, hoping that the blush on her cheeks would not strengthen under his regard. Or if it did, perhaps he would not guess that he was the reason. "I think your Uncle Levi is right," she told the children. "We should eat it all up at once." It was, she knew, something of a landmark, the first meal she had prepared for her new family. But as she sat down between Maggie and Ethan, it was not the man at the head of the table who gave her an approving smile, but Levi, across the table from her. Emmett, for his part, bowed his head and waited for silence before he said grace. "Dear Lord, we thank you for your provisions and the hands that made them. And we ask your peace, Lord, on those we have lost. Amen." "Amen," Sally murmured along with the rest of them. Even little Philip knew what to say. It was clear that this was the usual prayer said each day. She could not help but be struck by Emmett's words. Peace on those we have lost. He must mean his first wife and the child she had died in bearing. But if he remembered them so strongly as to make them part of the daily grace, why then should he have written for a bride so quickly? It didn't make any sense to her, it only added to her confusion, which was already considerable. And as she watched the dark, handsome face of the man she was engaged to, with its unreadable expression, she had a strong feeling that she wasn't going to discover the answers anytime soon. Chapter 5. A week went by, and another began. Emmett Ritter said not a word about when their wedding would take place. He scarcely said a word to Sally at all. Far from clarifying her own feelings about the subject, she found that she was more and more confused with each passing day, almost with each passing hour. Their engagement had been made explicit by the matrimonial agency before she came out west. It was written in black and white, with no possibility of there being a misunderstanding. Had he, then, changed his mind since her arrival? And whether that was true or not, why did he not just speak to her about it instead of treating her like a stranger? She was a stranger, she was painfully aware of it. But after only a few days, Levi and the children had started to treat her as though she was an old friend, even part of the family. Even Ethan was already warming up to her, and as the oldest of the children, she was not at all surprised that he should be the most reluctant. He would have the clearest memories of his mother, the most acute sense of what they had lost. But even he was willing, most of the time, to join in the games she played with his younger siblings, and she had even made him laugh once or twice, even though he seemed to be as serious and grave as his father. She longed to get to know Emmett the way she was coming to know the rest of the Ritter family, but he seemed to withhold himself from her, aloof and polite and quiet as he had been the day she had arrived. The most time she spent with him was while she was asleep. Nearly every night, she dreamed of him, and woke frustrated and vowing to herself that she would figure out a way to reach him. To get to know him, to feel that he knew her. Strangers no more, she promised herself with each new morning, and each evening brought a similar feeling of anguished despair. It was in just that frame of mind that she went to Levi late one afternoon, just before supper. The children were playing in the yard, while she shelled peas on the porch. She spotted her soon-to-be brother-in-law heading for the barn, unaccompanied for once. Usually, she did not see one Ritter brother without the other, or without an attendant fleet of ranch hands following behind. On impulse, she set aside her bowl of peas and ran after him, waving to the children to let them know that everything was all right. She caught him just as he was about to open the stall for one of the horses. He gave her a pleasant smile. "Why, hello there, Miss Sally. What brings you to the barn?" "You," she said, without thinking, and had to hurry and explain herself when she saw the look of utter delight and surprise that came over his face. "I mean, I must ask you something, Levi. I hope it isn't too forward of me, but..." He dropped his hands from the latch of the stall and reached for her. His hand lay so lightly on her sleeve that she could hardly feel it. "What is it?" he said. "You can ask me anything, Sally, you know that." Now that she was face to face with him, her hurry to seek him out seemed rather ridiculous. After all, it wasn't as though Emmett's behavior was changing with time. Still, she'd gotten his attention, and she had to follow through now, or she knew she might well lose her courage. She twined her fingers together and tried to keep her voice level as she spoke. "It's about your brother. Levi, I don't understand Emmett, and that's the honest truth. We're engaged to be married, and yet he says nothing about it. It's as though he doesn't even know why I'm here. Oh, I know that things like this usually take time, and the use of a matrimonial agency hurries it along almost unnaturally." She ran a hand through her hair absently, discovering that it was, indeed, falling from its pins as it usually did by this time of day. Oh, well, Levi didn't seem to mind what she looked like. "I wish that it could be more natural. If we had met in person and simply courted, but then, perhaps if we had met without the aid of the agency, he wouldn't have wanted to court me at all." She hid her face in her hands, feeling overwhelmed and almost shamed by the kindly way he was watching her. "I don't know how to say it, Levi, I only know that I'm confused by Emmett, and wish that I could understand him. If you could help me." They stood together for a long moment before Levi ventured a reply. "I don't imagine that any red-blooded man would turn down the opportunity to court you, Miss Sally, not even my fool of a brother. It's true that he suffered a great deal from the loss of his wife. He misses her still. But he knows quite well that you're soon to be Mrs. Emmett Ritter. As hard as it might be, you might just have to be patient." She sighed and nodded, looking up at him. "You're right, of course. Patience, that's what I need. It's a virtue that my mother often told me I ought to spend more time cultivating." She managed a rather weak smile. "Thank you, Levi. I suppose I ought not to have asked you about your brother, but, well, he said it himself. This is a marriage of convenience, of necessity. I'm to be his wife and stepmother to his children, but that's all." She bit her lip, feeling the ridiculous and sudden urge to cry. Nothing more meaningful than that. Levi drew in a deep breath, and she looked up at him, wiping away the tears from her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, managing a chuckle at her own expense. It's silly of me to feel this way, to say these things to you. I suppose my romantic nature has overcome my better judgment." She turned away. "Perhaps that's been the case all along, from the moment I inquired at the matrimonial agency to see whether I might become a bride." She left him there and went back to the house, feeling a strange, heavy weight on her soul. The children were still playing, and she was glad of it. It brought her some peace of mind to sit back in her rocking chair on the porch and watch them. Ethan had stepped away from the younger ones for a moment, his eyes fixed on her form, and she knew with a certainty that he was, in his mature and gentlemanly way, ascertaining that she was all right. She met his gaze, nodded, and managed a smile. His brow cleared in relief, and he turned back to the game of tag. She sighed and picked up her task once more. Such a grown-up look from one so young, she thought. Perhaps that was what happened when a child lost a mother at such a young age. She reminded herself that, as difficult as some things in her life had been, she ought to be grateful for the time she'd had with her own mother before her loss. 2 things to cultivate, then, patience and gratitude. And one day, perhaps, she would be more worthy of the noble nature of Emmett Ritter. The day moved along like any other. As the sun neared the horizon, she called the children in to help her with supper. The Ritters ate supper at 6 o'clock, with the final few chores to be completed afterwards before an hour of reading and then bedtime for the children. But tonight, as she laid the table and lifted Philip up into a chair, Emmett and Levi did not appear. She glanced around at the children, waiting with expectant faces, and made a decision. "Ethan, will you dish up plates for yourself, Maggie, and Philip? I'll go and see what's keeping your father and uncle, but we can't wait too much longer." Ethan acquiesced eagerly, which didn't surprise Sally a bit. After the long afternoon spent playing tag and Red Rover, all 3 of the children were bound to be starving. The twilight was well on its way as she made her way toward the barn once more. The ranch hands had left for the day, heading home to get their own suppers, but the barn door was halfway open and as she drew closer, she heard conversation. No, not conversation, argument. Heated argument, at that. She crept closer, her heart in her throat. "You can't tell me that it isn't true, the way you treat her. Like she's little more than a maid in the household, a nanny to the kids." She flinched at that. She couldn't help it. She'd never heard Levi sound so angry, for it was undeniably Levi who was speaking. And it was just as undeniably Emmett who replied. "I don't have any intention of saying it isn't true. I told her from the beginning. We're engaged to marry because my children need a stepmother, and that's all. She hasn't any right to expect anything more, not when she applies for a match from a matrimonial agency. It isn't as though they can guarantee love in a marriage." It made sense, of course it made sense, and yet, her heart was thudding in her chest, and she felt sick to her stomach to hear him point it out. It was almost worse to hear his voice, so matter-of-fact and calm, emotionless. "You don't know what love looks like," said Levi. "You wouldn't know it if it bit you. You watch your mouth, Levi Ritter." Now there was emotion in that calm voice, and the emotion was anger. "I loved Anna like she was part of me, and you know it. To say that I don't know love is to disrespect her memory." A pause, and to her surprise, Levi's voice was the calm one, now. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. You did love Anna, I reckon you still do, the way you cling on to her memory and turn your back on the thought of loving again. But Anna is gone, Emmett, and Sally is here with you. She's here to marry you. You promised her you would." "I know it." "Then you ought to do something about it. I'll tell you what it's like. It's as though the rest of us are gathered in the yard, laughing and talking and gettin' to know each other, and you're still standin' on the porch all alone, like you were the day she got here. She's not difficult to get to know, and anyone can see that she wants to know you. Why are you putting her off?" A long, raw pause, and Emmett said quietly, "I don't rightly know." "I know," his younger brother said swiftly. "It's because you know in your heart that Sally deserves more than just a marriage of convenience. She deserves more than just a match made of necessity, because Ethan and Maggie and Phil need a ma. She's better than that, Emmett. You could have just hired a nanny if that was all you wanted." She's worth more than just that. I'm sure she is. Then why don't you offer her more? I can't. The words rapped out so starkly that Sally jumped. I can't give her more than that, Levi, don't you understand? It hasn't even been a full year since Anna died, and I can't just replace her like that. If it weren't for the children, I'd be a widowed bachelor to the end of my days. Do you think I want to marry again? Then you should let her go. Let her marry someone else. Someone who can care for her the way she deserves. We have an agreement, Levi Ritter. She and I both paid a fee to that matrimonial agency. We can't just back out of it now. A fee. Sally jumped again. There was such fury and frustration in Levi's voice that she shrank away from the barn door, half wanting to run back to the house, but feeling driven to listen all the same. A fee. Forget your money, Emmett Ritter. What does that matter when it's a question of happiness? Whose happiness, Levi? Emmett asked, suddenly sounding exhausted. Hers, or yours? A wordless shout of anger followed by the sound of quick, stomping footsteps was all the warning that Sally received. She hurled herself away from the barn and ran for the house, but the door to the barn was shoved fully open before she had gone more than a few feet. Blinking away tears and fighting the sense of chagrin, as though she were a child caught out in some mischief, she turned to face him. It took Levi a moment to see her in the gathering dark. Sally. She gulped. Yes, I was coming to find you. We'd been waiting supper, and the children were hungry. Sally, he said again, and stepped forward, reaching for her hand. He drew her toward him and stood looking down at her in the dim light from the oil lamps in the barn. She swallowed hard and steeled herself to meet his gaze, fearing that he would see her eavesdropping written plain on her face. But he said nothing about that, only gazed at her for a long moment, seeming to work up his courage. The words that burst from him took her by such surprise that she might have fallen over if not for his firm grasp on her arm. Will you marry me? Caught unawares, she could do nothing but stare at him wide-eyed as she tried to formulate a response that seemed appropriate. The trouble was, she thought vaguely, that nothing was appropriate. What did a girl say when her supposed brother-in-law asked her to marry him, with her current fiancé not 20 feet away? She managed inelegantly. But Emmett. I don't think Emmett rightly cares, Levi said, his lips pressing together in distaste. He looked up to see his brother standing in the doorway, framed in the light from behind him. Sally's heart leapt in her chest at the sight. He was little more than a black silhouette, broad-shouldered and muscular. She could see nothing of the expression on his face, whatever it might be. Do you, Emmett? As long as she's here to take care of the children, it doesn't matter much whether she marries you or me. The fee has been paid, so the agency ought to be satisfied, don't you think? His tone made her want to cringe away from him. There was anger there, still, unmistakable, but there was also a rather cold edge to the way he spoke. That was what anger could do to a gentleman, she thought, anger, and whatever other emotions were fueling Levi Ritter. She waited for Emmett to speak up, for him to deny Levi's claim, to tell him that he, not Levi, would be the one getting married. But the silence stretched on for far too long, and with a sinking heart she knew what his reply would be. Well, he said at last. Seein' as you're already there, Levi, you may as well. Chapter 6. Sally Dawson was sure that she was dreaming. It was impossible, wasn't it? That she had left her home in New York behind to marry one man, only to find herself engaged to another before 2 weeks had gone by. It seemed as though everything about her new life had changed in the blink of an eye, and yet nothing had changed, not really. And that seemed the most impossible of all. Was she dreaming that she had accepted Levi's proposal, with Emmett's apparent blessing? Or if not blessing, exactly, at least with his disinterested indifference. It made her want to weep a little to think of it. On the other hand, Levi behaved far more like an engaged man than Emmett had ever done. Over the next few days, his manner did not change exceedingly. He maintained his friendliness and his warmth, and his eyes lingered on hers no more and no less than they had done before. But there was a sense of relief about him, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and she could not help but wonder whether Levi had been fighting feelings for her from the moment they had met. Feelings he had been wrong for harboring when she was engaged to his brother, but now that she was to be his, those same feelings were only natural. As for her own feelings, she had to admit to herself, with chagrin and shame, that she was no less confused now than she had been before. If anything, she was more confused. It was the way Emmett treated her, now that their engagement was ended, and they had no expectation of being married to each other. It was as though he, too, had a weight lifted from his shoulders. As though the cool politeness that he had invariably shown to her was thawing simply from the release of pressure, the pressure of being engaged to marry her. It was insulting, of course, if she thought about it too much. And so, she tried not to think about it. But sometimes, she did. Would she really have been so terrible for him to be married to? Oh, he had told her that it was a marriage of convenience, and he evidently realized that she had been disappointed by that. But still. She hadn't complained, had she? She had accepted it. It was Levi who had pushed things further. And now and then, she caught Emmett looking at her with a different sort of look in his eyes. Just as unreadable, but if she hadn't known better, she would have labeled it appreciation. That, she was certain, was only because of how his children felt about her. By agreement, the three adults had decided to withhold the news of the change in wedding parties until later. It couldn't matter much to them, as Levi pointed out, for Sally would still be there just the same. Sally wasn't entirely sure about this. Though all three of the children had easily taken to calling her Sally, even little Phil, who still found talking difficult, managed to burble Lee. Every time he saw her, she had a feeling that, when the adults were not around, at least Maggie referred to her as Mother. Not Ma, Anna Ritter would always be Ma. But Sally, with her Eastern accent and her New York ways, could be Mother. Except, she never would be, now. She was uncomfortable with the thought of hiding such a large change from the children. She went to Levi with this discomfort, and he listened to her pour her heart out, as he always did. She felt better just for saying it and ended with a grateful smile. He put his arm around her. "Tell you what," he said. "Let's make it an occasion. A celebration. We'll tell the children, and we'll announce our engagement to others at the same time. That way, they'll feel like they're part of something big. It would be quite grown up for them to sit at the supper table with everyone and hear a piece of news like that." Her smile relaxed into something warmer and more real. "That's a wonderful idea. Yes, I'm sure they'd love it. Who should we invite?" "Oh, Bill and Mac and Tommy Thompson, for sure. They're our most reliable ranch hands, and work with us year-round. Mac's married, so his wife would come, of course. The Johnsons, maybe, we've known them forever." She couldn't help but laugh. "Is there anyone in Spring Hollow that you haven't known forever?" He furrowed his brow in thought. "Well, come to think of it, no, I guess not." Sally laughed again. "Well, I suppose I'd better plan a dinner party, then. How many do you think we can fit around the big table in the dining room?" Now, Levi's frown was more genuine. He shook his head. "I don't know about that, Sally." She tilted her head at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we don't use the dining room much. I've noticed. We always have meals in the kitchen. But it's a lovely big room, with plenty of space for a good-sized party. And so handsomely appointed, but it hasn't been touched in months, it looks like." "Why is that?" Levi opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again and shook his head firmly. "No, you'd better just ask Emmett, that's all. I'm not saying we can't, but it is really his house, after all." "Isn't it yours, too?" she asked, teasing gently, but he shook his head again. "No. This is Emmett's house. When Ma and Pa died, they left it to him along with 3 birds. He's the oldest, so it made sense. I know that I'm welcome to live here as long as I want, but, well, I'm just lazy, I guess. Never had a reason to go out and get a house of my own." He scratched the back of his neck, smiling at her suddenly. "Till now, maybe." She smiled back, but there was doubt in her heart. How strange to think that this house that had come to feel like her own would never belong to her. And that she would never belong to it, and yet, it seemed so right to be here, with the children. That was another question. How would the children take it, if she and Levi moved away after they were married? She would cross that bridge when she came to it, she decided. In the meantime, the real question lay in the mystery of the unused dining room. Even the thought of speaking to Emmett about the matter showed clearly just how confused her emotions were. She quailed at the thought of confronting him with the question, and yet the need to speak to him privately, just the two of them, was a draw all by itself. Reluctant to allow herself too much time to get to the heart of why, precisely, that might be, she determined to address it as soon as possible. The next afternoon, unexpectedly, gave her the opportunity she was looking for. She was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on an apple pie for dessert that evening, when the outside door opened abruptly, and Emmett stepped in. He stopped stock still, eyes wide as he gazed at her. She, for her part, felt similarly frozen at the unexpected sight of him. It was, she realized, the first time they had been alone since the night of Levi's proposal. The thought made a blush start on her cheeks. Anxious to ward it off, she turned away from him and finished trimming the edges of the crust. "Good afternoon, Emmett." He swallowed. "Miss Sally," he said. She was grateful, she supposed, that he hadn't insisted on going back to calling her Miss Dawson upon the dissolution of their engagement, as she had halfway expected him to. The little one's around?" "Philip is taking his nap. Maggie and Ethan are out with the chickens. A few baby chicks hatched this morning." She glanced back up at him, frowning. "I assure you that I am keeping an eye on them just as they require, Emmett. I wouldn't shirk my duties when it comes to those children." "Oh, sure," he said automatically. "I mean, I know you wouldn't. You're very good with them. They've taken quite a shine to you, I guess." It was the most complimentary thing he had ever told her, and she found a new reason for a blush to threaten. She dusted off her hands on her apron in a businesslike fashion and turned to him. "Since you're here, Emmett, I'd like to ask you something. And I hope you won't turn me down out of hand," she added quickly, fearing that he might do just that, even without knowing what the request might be. She had never seen a man look so very much like a trapped animal. He shoved his hands in his pockets and gave an ungraceful shrug. "All right," he said. "Go ahead." She came to stand before him, her hands clasped before her. "Levi and I have come up with the plan of hosting a dinner party," she said, and couldn't help but note the slight flinch at her words. Did he dislike being reminded that his younger brother was now engaged to his former fiancée? Well, he would have to get accustomed to the idea, wouldn't he? She thought ruthlessly. "I thought perhaps it might be nice to hold it in the dining room, but Levi said I ought to ask you about it before I make any such plans. This is not Levi's home, of course, and even more so, it is not mine. I would never do such a thing without your agreement." She hesitated, trying to read his expression, and failing, as usual. "Might I use the dining room?" He remained frozen, eyes fixed on hers, for far longer than she expected for such a simple question. At last, he turned his head away, drawing a long, deep breath as though it pained him. "We haven't set foot in there for over a year," he said. "Well, nigh a year and a half, I guess." It was on the tip of her tongue to tell him that surely someone must have, or the whole place would be inches thick in dust. But something warned her to keep the flippant remark, however accurate, to herself. There was pain in his eyes, she recognized that readily enough, and it caught at her heart, warming her with compassion. There was nothing that needed to be said, nothing that it was appropriate to say. She waited in silence, giving him only a gentle nod. He went on. "Anna was a great one for parties," he said, a ghost of a smile warming his handsome face. "She never met a stranger, and all of them found their way here at one time or another, seated around that dining table in there. It was her grandmother's table. Her ma gave it to her as a wedding present, when she moved here from Summersville, 20 miles away, to marry me 11 years ago." He shook his head slightly, a sigh escaping him. "I can just see one of those suppers now, all of us gathered around, Logan, at Bart Johnson tellin' one of his stories, and Anna just sitting back and smiling. All that mattered to her was that everyone there had a good time. enjoyed themselves. Afterwards, I would help her with the dishes, clean the place up, and she looked even happier then. She'd always ask me, "Do you think everyone enjoyed themselves tonight?" And I'd tell her, they were happier when they went home than they were before they came. Another sigh. And it was always true. Anna had a knack for that, makin' folks happy. Sally's throat was dry. It took a moment of trying before she managed the words. "She made you happy." Again, that smile. "She did," he admitted quietly. "And I still remember that night, the last time we had a party. The way everyone looked. Smiling and happy, but no one could have possibly been as happy as I was, just watching her presiding over the table. Taking it all in, smiling and silent. It wasn't until later that she told me that our little one was on the way. Our fourth. She was certain it would be another girl." He stopped abruptly, swallowing hard. Sally could tell that it cost him a great effort to keep his composure. She reached out to him without thinking, her compassion moving her to action, and for a moment he let her lay her hand on his sleeve. They stood connected until Emmett Ritter shook off his emotions, shook off the past. He stood up straight and turned his unfathomable dark eyes to hers once more. "You want to use the dining room," he said. "You're welcome to it. It's time, I reckon, that happiness was found in there once more." Sally felt as though she stood on the edge of a precipice, an invisible fall, a danger she could not even see. She had wanted the use of the dining room, of course. It had seemed right, to plan a dinner party and tell everyone that she and Levi were engaged. But now it felt as though the room belonged to Emmett's lost wife, to Anna Ritter, as though everything that was done there would happen under the watchful gaze of a ghost. She almost wished that he had turned her down flat, as she had half suspected he would do. But he had given her what she wanted, and there was no guile or regret in his words. It cost him something, and he had given it to her willingly, despite that cost. He gave her a half-smile, too, as much reassurance as he was likely capable of, and then left her where she stood, heading back out to his next chore. She never did find out what he came in search of to begin with. This generosity on his part, for it was generosity, she knew, as silly as it sounded, to call the use of a room in the house generous, it clearly meant more than the sum of its parts, did not help to clarify her feelings toward her former fiancé. If anything, she was more confused than ever, a feeling she had not suspected could exist, all things considered. The thought of disturbing that quiet, even that dust, in the dining hall made her feel strangely bereft, as though she had lost something, too. Or perhaps it was just respect for the woman who had been Emmett's wife, the mother of his children. Her absence did not leave a ghostly pall over the entire house, but it did seem centered there in the dining room, the location of so many happy occasions. Did Sally dare try to host her own? It was silly, really. She didn't believe in ghosts. But to deny Anna Ritter's presence in the home would be to deny her existence to begin with. Memory was just as strong as an ethereal shape, perhaps even stronger. If her only presence was formed from the memories of Emmett and his children, that was certainly presence enough. Perhaps, Sally thought, she ought to ask Anna to help her host. It was too overwhelming to think about, and so she resolved to put it aside for the time being. It would be no use in speaking to Levi about it. What would he say, except for mouthing empty reassurances that Anna was gone for good and had no feeling on the subject? It was his brother's feelings he'd been concerned about, and rightly so. And if Emmett was content to let her play the mistress of the house, even now that they weren't going to be married, then who was she to contradict him? Still, she wished he would have turned her down. It was, perhaps, this confusion of feelings that led to the confrontation the very next day. She'd spent half the morning planning the upcoming supper party. Levi had handed her a little list of people he wanted to invite, and she had sat down that morning to calculate what was needed to feed everyone. All told, it was some 20 people, including the children, not an overwhelming amount of guests, but still far more than she had ever planned for herself, and she was feeling a bit out of sorts as the afternoon set in. It was a beautiful day, and the children were out playing in it. She wanted to be out there with them, not figuring out supplies and prices for a supper that she was not particularly enthused about hosting to begin with. But it was a responsibility that must be cared for, and she told herself as much quite sternly as she bent her head again over the papers in front of her. Chapter 7. The door to the kitchen opened. She glanced up, expecting to see Levi. He'd promised to check in on her and see how she was getting along. But it wasn't Levi, it was the older of the two Ritters, and he looked to be in a bit of a mood himself. He stopped still, and they stared at each other. "Good morning, Miss Sally." "Good afternoon," she corrected him. "It's well past noon, you know." His brow furrowed. "I wasn't paying attention, I guess. Other things to attend to than keep an eye on the skies. I'm sure you must be very busy. Running the ranch." "Sure am," he said, ungracefully, and they eyed each other for a moment more. She wished she could put a finger on what it was, exactly, this strange spark in the air between them. It felt like heat lightning, unexpected and brilliant and all around uncomfortable. For the first time, she felt rather belligerent toward him, and despite her instinct toward shame for feeling such a way, she found herself defending it all the same. After all, he had invited her to marry him, and what had he done? He'd extricated himself from their engagement at the drop of a hat, at the first opportunity he'd been afforded, and it almost seemed as though he had orchestrated it, simply by being so aloof with her, as though he knew that his brother would step up and offer to take his place. No, no. She caught herself mid-thought. That was unfair. There was no reason to suspect Emmett of such duplicity. He shifted his weight and folded his arms. "You look a mite busy yourself." "I suppose so. It's this supper Levi wants to host." He arched an eyebrow. "Oh, so it was Levi's idea, was it?" She bit her lip, but it was too late to take it back now. "And I agreed with him wholeheartedly," she said. "We both agreed that we would need to tell the children what we'd all decided, and that it might be easier on them if they find out along with everyone else, rather than feel they were left in the dark simply because they're children." "Which they are," the children's father said, frowning. "I don't know that I care for the idea of them finned in, out, sitting around their mother's supper table, that their stepmother is going to marry someone else." Somewhere deep within, Sally knew that Emmett was well within his rights to express doubts about the way Levi had chosen to handle this. Still, something about his objection seemed like a personal affront. She stood up from the table, palms planted before her. "How else would you choose to tell them?" she said. "Or would you rather they not find out at all? Perhaps you can continue fooling them, as long as Levi and I aren't married, but at some point, they are bound to ask questions." His frown grew deeper. She couldn't blame him, hearing the prickliness in her own voice, but she couldn't seem to stop herself either. "I didn't raise those kids to ask questions," he said. "Oh, they can be mischievous at times, but for the most part they do as they're told and don't need to know why. When I choose to tell them, they'll accept it for what it is. They won't wonder." "Of course they'll wonder," she shot back. "It's in a child's nature to wonder. They know why I came here. They've already accepted me as their stepmother. What will you have them believe? That I was never going to marry their father at all? I don't see that it matters to you one way or another," he said coolly. This, more than anything else, got her fired up. "I see. The problem, as far as you can tell, is that I lack feeling for those children. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Emmett Ritter. From the moment I set foot on Three Birds Ranch, I knew that those three little ones would be the saving grace of this new life of mine. I knew that whatever should happen in the end, even if you never cared for me at all, I had made the right decision in coming here, for their sakes. They've lost so much, Emmett, and they have so little. It isn't right to keep something good from them, if they have the opportunity for it." "By something good, you mean yourself, I suppose." "Am I not?" she cried. "I suppose I should be modest and retiring and refrain from acknowledging that I have some worth. That's what people have expected of me all my life. But I've seen the look on Philip's face when I take him in my arms. I've held Maggie's hand as we ran through the fields. I've seen Ethan's smile as I praise him for something he's done. I can be good for those children, Emmett, yes, I can, and whether it's as their stepmother or as their aunt, it doesn't matter." "Seems to me that's no longer a question," he said quietly. "Seein' as you've decided against marrying me. Even though you sound a lot more like their mother than any aunt I've ever heard of, sure you don't want to change your mind?" She caught her breath. It wasn't the words themselves that stabbed her to the heart, it was the fact that, though she knew he must have been teasing, his tone was still largely bereft of emotion. Even now, in this time of great feeling, he had nothing to give her. And she was convinced now that he never would. "My mind," she said, slowly and distinctly, "is made up." He gave a faint sigh. "And yet," he said, "you lecture me on my children as though they were your own. It's my brother you're marrying, Miss Dawson, not me." Somehow, amid the fiery discussion, she had left her place standing beside the table and come to stand closer to him. He had stepped forward, too, and she realized suddenly that they were a scant few inches away from each other. If she reached up, even just a little, toward his broad frame, she could touch his cheek with her hand, or slap him. If she reached up, she could wrap her arms around his neck and pull him down closer to her, close enough to kiss him. And by the light in his eyes, she knew that she wasn't the only one who was thinking it. She stepped back hastily, and he dropped his head. He half turned away from her, rubbing the back of his neck. There was a higher color in his tanned cheeks than usual. Perhaps he had been feeling some emotion after all. "Well, then," he said softly. "You're awful busy with that party planning. I guess I'd better let you get back to it." Then he stepped away from her, disappearing back out the kitchen door. Once again, she was left wondering whether she would ever know for certain what he had come in search of. Chapter 8. The sunlight drenched the branches of the old oak, dappling the two figures beneath the branches. It was unorthodox to be getting married outside, of course, but Sally Dawson had never been the sort of girl who did things by the book. "And neither am I," said her newlywed husband, smiling down at her, dark eyes alight. "It's all in the family. Remember, you're Sally Ritter, now." He drew her close to him, bending to press his lips to hers. As she wound her arms around his neck and clung tightly to him, she wondered how she could ever have doubted. She sat up in bed with a gasp. For a long moment, she huddled there, knees drawn up to her chest, face buried in her hands. That dark-haired, dark-eyed man in her dream, the one she had been embracing so closely, so passionately, dared she name him, even to herself? But there was no use in pretending otherwise. It had been Emmett, not Levi, and she knew it. It was still early yet, the sun was only just beginning to approach the horizon, leaving a silvery gray haze in the dawn air. She pushed herself out of bed anyhow, knowing that she'd never be able to get back to sleep after that dream. Besides, there was a great deal to be done today, so she might as well get a jump on things. This afternoon, around 4, the participants who had been invited to the dinner party would begin to arrive, and she wanted to make sure that everything was perfect before the first carriage pulled up into the driveway. It had been a busy week, and how strange, to realize that it had only been a week since Levi had asked her to marry him. Which meant that she had only been in Spring Hollow for just under 3 weeks, and that seemed impossible, all on its own. Surely, she had been born and raised here. It felt much more like a home than New York had ever done. The beautiful surroundings, the mountains in the distance, the mighty trees, the rolling hills, the lowing cattle, everything felt calm and peaceful, and she was grateful for it. Especially since her own mental state had been anything but, these past few days. The trouble was, of course, Emmett. Blushing even as she thought about it, she had to admit to herself that the dream was only one of many. It was far from the first time that he had invaded her dreams, and her thoughts throughout the day, as well. For the most part, life on Three Birds Ranch had carried on as it had done before the object of her engagement was changed from the elder brother to the younger. For the most part. There was less frustration, at least, involved in being engaged to Levi. He was just as friendly and kind and interested as he had been before. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, complimented her cooking, asked her how she was feeling and whether he could do anything to help around the house. He really was an ideal husband to be, she knew. And by rights, she ought to be deeply in love with him, as attached as he seemed to be to her. And yet, it wasn't Levi who was invading her dreams. She shoved the thought away decisively. If she sat here daydreaming about things all morning, she'd never get anything done. And there was so much to be done. Thankfully, the Ritter brothers were out attending to their chores when she snuck into the kitchen door. The children weren't up yet, as evidenced by the silence of the house, she took advantage of the time to herself to stand on the threshold of the open door for a bit, sipping her coffee and enjoying the peace and calm of the early morning. It was astounding how quickly this house had become home. And yet, it wasn't, not really. It wasn't her house and never would be. She wondered distantly where Levi would decide to build, and what sort of home they would end up with. She then gave up the thoughts because they were depressing her. It was time to get busy, anyhow. Chapter 9. By the time the children came down, clattering and stomping and laughing, breakfast was on the table. She directed the older two to their chairs to wait for their father and uncle, then swept little Philip into her arms, humming and smiling at him as she put the kettle back on the stove for more coffee. She was dancing him around the kitchen, Maggie singing along with her and Ethan smiling broadly, when she was suddenly aware that she was being watched. Emmett stood in the doorway, silent and still. His eyes were fixed on her with such intensity that she felt a little shiver run down her back, but it wasn't an unpleasant shiver. If only she could understand him, she thought despairingly. If only he would just be clear in what he wanted. They'd been engaged, but he hadn't fought to keep her engagement, nor had he given any indication that he was ready to move forward. He was still in love with his lost wife, that much was obvious, and yet that look in his eyes suggested something. He gave a yelp and stumbled forward, shoved from behind. Levi followed him in, laughing. Froze in your tracks, eh? Look, Emmett, some of us want coffee and breakfast. You can stand around all you want if you let me in. He gave a broad wink to Sally as he went to his place. Another beautiful spread. What would we do without you, Miss Sally? Oh, I have a feeling you'd get along all right. Both older children and their uncle shook their heads emphatically. Nuh-uh, said Maggie, taking a heaping spoonful of sugar for her oatmeal. Sally laughed but stopped when she caught Emmett's eye. He glanced away from her almost immediately and came to take his seat at the table. They settled down, and she was relieved to find that conversation took its usual course, a mixture of teasing from the children, shop talk from the adults, and she was not required to contribute unless she felt like it. She cuddled little Philip in her arms, smoothing down his soft, dark curls, and let herself revel in the contentment of it all. If only it was like this all the time. If only things weren't so complicated. But all good things must come to an end, and it wasn't long before Levi turned to her and inquired, "Everything all right for the supper tonight, Sally?" "Oh, I've quite a bit to do, of course, but I'll manage." "You'll call for me if I can help, won't you?" She smiled at him. "Yes, of course. Thank you, Levi." And then, like a magnet, she couldn't help her gaze being drawn to Emmett's. He was looking at her, too, this time. He didn't look away immediately. Their gazes met and held, and she felt a blush starting at the base of her throat. It only intensified when she realized that Levi had caught the look, too. His dark brows drew down over the bridge of his nose, puzzled. "But I'm sure that the children will be all the help I need," she added hastily. "Don't you think so, Ethan? Maggie?" Bless their hearts, they nodded at once, smiling and excited to be involved in their first real grown-up dinner party. She could have hugged them then and there. She refrained, for the moment. Breakfast was finished in its usual flurry, with the men suddenly realizing how late it was getting and how much there was to be done, scraping their plates hastily and leaving by the back door. The children finished a bit more leisurely, while she had another cup of coffee. Then there was the by now habitual routine of cleanup, Ethan carrying water from the pump outside, Maggie taking scraps to the chickens, Philip playing with the soap bubbles as Sally washed up the dishes. Once the regular duties of the morning were completed, she set each of them to a task that would contribute to the readiness of the household for the coming event, Maggie cleaning the silverware, Ethan carrying wood for the fire, Philip sweeping the floor with a broom that was 3 times his size. She would have to go over it again, she knew, but he was so happy to be helping that she couldn't simply tell him to go and play. For her own part, she started on supper preparations. There was much to be chopped and grated, cooked and broiled, stewed and baked. The bread alone took up the whole day, the whole chickens roasted slowly, the mashed potatoes seemed to always need just a bit more butter. But with the enthusiastic help of the children, the supper was nearly ready when the first visitor knocked on the door. Levi had asked her to invite several old friends, all of whom had known the Ritter family for years. This meant, of course, that they had known Anna as well, and all of them had been a guest at Anna's table, at one time or another. It was intimidating enough just meeting them all. As she shook hands and welcomed them, a bit self-consciously, to Emmett's house, she wondered at her own sanity. What had she been thinking, to orchestrate a dinner party like this, when she was new to the area and had never done such a thing before? After all, she was just a maid. With a great effort, and the help of a steadying smile from Levi, she managed to get a hold of herself before her emotions spiraled out of control. After all, these were all friends of Levi and Emmett. They must be good people. They would soon be her friends, too. As the last couple, the Johnsons, showed up and were directed to their seats in the dining room, she stepped back into the kitchen for a moment to make certain that everything was ready, and to say a brief prayer for help and a calm heart. With that done, she felt a bit better, and ready for the night ahead. A little supper, and then the announcement of her engagement to Levi. Her heart twisted within her to imagine what the children might say or think, or how they might feel, when they found it out. She could only hope that everything would turn out for the best. As she came back down the hall, she saw there was a figure standing in the door of the dining room, hesitating, just out of the light. It was Emmett, of course. She would have recognized his stalwart form anywhere. There was just enough light from the oil lamps in the dining hall to set his eyes to glittering. She saw as she came closer, he was watching the happy crowd within, a look of longing in his eyes. She thought she knew exactly what he must be thinking, missing Anna, of course. Wishing that things were different. And despite the shameful surge of jealousy in her heart, she couldn't help but feel for him. She stepped close to him and laid a hand gently on his sleeve. He turned toward her, a half-smile on his lips, his eyes full of warmth and sadness. She caught her breath, and just managed to keep herself from reaching for him, taking him into her arms for comfort. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting his gaze and willing him to understand the depth and trueness of her gratitude. "I know this is difficult. Thank you." He bit his lip and nodded, without speaking. His offered arm was telling enough. She took it, slipping her arm through the crook of his elbow, and together they went into the dining room. The first person she saw watching was Levi. Blushing, she went to her seat beside him. He gave her an odd smile. "Everything all right?" She took a deep breath and managed to smile back. "Everything is perfect," she said. It was perfect, in a strange, unfamiliar way. The faces she didn't know ringed around the table, interested and inquisitive, undoubtedly curious about the newcomer in their midst. More importantly, though, the three children, scattered in between them all, beaming and delighted to be included. She smiled at them, and her heart felt warm and full to see the love in their eyes as they smiled back. Those children were her saving grace, no matter what happened. And all the while, she was almost painfully conscious of the presence of Emmett, at the head of the table. At least, she saw as she risked a glance in his direction, he was smiling now. Perhaps, after everything, this would help to lay the painful memories of Anna to rest. It did almost feel as though the old mistress of the house was there with them, but her presence was a help, not a hindrance, and as the supper began, Sally found that she could breathe a little easier. She even found that she was enjoying herself. It was almost a shock to hear Levi tap on his wine glass with a spoon and see him stand up. But she knew what was coming next. It was the whole purpose of this dinner party, wasn't it? To be introduced to the Ritters' closest friends, to have her engagement announced. It was silly of her to want to climb under the table rather than listen to Levi speak the words aloud. "I reckon," he said, "that all of you would like to join me in thanking Sally for this spread." "It's beautifully done, Miss Sally, thank you." He raised his hands and clapped, and the rest of the room followed suit, bursting into applause. Ethan even let loose a whistle, which made Sally laugh despite her painful self-consciousness. If only that were where the speech ended, but no, there was more. "And speaking of Miss Sally," Levi went on, "I'm sure you're all interested to know how she came to be staying here with us." He turned and gave her a grin. "Well, it's no secret that she was written for as a mail-order bride. The word got around town, I hear, so there's no point in trying to argue it now. But there's one slight discrepancy in the rumor. It's me Sally was engaged to. Something was wrong, something was off, a bit strange. Everyone was still listening, without murmuring amongst themselves, but she could tell from the tension in the air that they were all confused. Well, so was she. The way Levi was talking, it was almost as though. But that's all changed now, Levi went on. I reckon it might make a bit of a scandal, but we'll see it through. See, Sally and me, our engagement is ended. He turned to her again, his eyes soft, and she stared up at him wildly. But it's not because we don't care for each other. It's just how it turned out. And I hope she decides she wants to stay around here in Spring Hollow. I hope she wants to stay here on Three Birds, because all of us have come to care for her very much. He gave a slight shrug. But it's her decision. He held her gaze for a moment, then turned back to the rest of the table. Anyhow, Sally's our friend, and we wanted the rest of you to meet her, so you can be her friends, too. Maybe she'll make up her mind that Spring Hollow is worth sticking around for. He sat back down, amid a chorus of welcomes and appreciative comments. Sally sat for a moment, trembling a little, trying to smile and murmur her thanks, but her mind was in a whirl, caught somewhere between tears and a strange relief. As the murmurs died down and the conversation turned more general, she tugged on Levi's sleeve. I've got to speak with you, she murmured. He raised an eyebrow. Now? But we haven't had dessert yet. She narrowed her eyes at him, and he grinned and nodded. All right, he said obediently. Now it is. He followed her from the table, down the hallway, and out the kitchen door. It was only then, in the quiet warmth of the late spring night, that she found the words she wanted to say. What on earth was that? Levi put his hands in his pockets and shrugged. I figured you'd be pleased. What? Why on earth should you think that? Because you don't want to marry me. Don't try to tell me I'm wrong, Miss Sally, you're too honest for that. I can tell every time you look at me. You were practically begging me with your eyes not to say anything at the table tonight. I've never seen anyone quite so disinterested in their own engagement, and that includes my brother. She flinched at that, and he reached out a hand to her at once. I'm sorry. That wasn't nice of me, and I shouldn't have said it. But you know it's true, Sally. You know that you're glad that we're not engaged anymore. I tried to do it the right way, the way that would cause the least amount of gossip. If it weren't for the fact that everyone knew Emmett had written to the matrimonial agency, we could have just said you were a nanny we'd sent for. But I figured you might want your options open. She gaped at him. My options? Sure. Another shrug, and she wanted to shake him a bit. This way, if you and Emmett decide to marry after all. Levi. She paced in front of him, feeling so agitated that she felt she was going to pieces right there in the backyard. Don't even say such things. How could you, why did you, goodness, I can't even formulate a sentence. If you didn't want to marry me, if you changed your mind, why didn't you say so? I would have understood. It isn't that, he said gently, taking her hand and stopping her pacing. It isn't that at all. I haven't changed my mind, Sally. I love you just as much now as I did the first moment I laid eyes on you. It's you who've changed, my dear, and I realize that it isn't just that you deserve to be loved. But you deserve to be married to someone that you love, in return. He smiled at her, despite the sadness in his eyes. And you don't love me, do you? She bit her lip. I want to say yes. Tell me the truth, Sally Dawson. You owe me that. You owe yourself that, too. She caught her breath and nodded. You're right, Levi. I don't love you, not like a wife loves her husband. I ought to, Lord knows. You're a wonderful man, and you've been so kind to me. I'd be better off if I did love you. Modesty precludes me from agreeing with you too wholeheartedly, Levi said, laughing. Maybe if there was no one else around, you'd come to love me eventually. But there is someone, isn't there? There's Emmett. Once again, she caught her breath, her eyes flooding with tears. "You don't understand, Levi, Emmett doesn't love me. He doesn't care the least bit about me." "You're the one who doesn't understand, Sally," Levi said softly. "I've seen the way my brother looks at you when he thinks you won't notice. His heart is plain on his face every time he sees you with his children. He made the right decision in asking you to come and marry him, and he knows it. He's just been too stubborn to ask us to go back to the way things were." He smiled. "Well, he won't have to, now." He turned his head slightly, almost looking back over his shoulder. "Will you, Emmett?" Sally's heart was in her mouth. Emmett stood in the doorway. She'd have known that stalwart figure anywhere. "This was all my fault, Sally," Levi said, gently drawing her attention back to him. "I told you that you needed patience with Emmett. But I didn't show any of my own. I should have known that Emmett would fall in love with you if I just gave him a little more time." He smiled sadly. "Doesn't seem like he could have helped it, any more than I could." She drew a shaky breath. "Oh, Levi, are you sure?" He nodded. "I'm sure. I love you, Sally Dawson, and so I'm setting you free. And I meant what I said, you see. It's your choice. You have the right to choose who you want to be marry, without being forced to it one way or another. I reckon you've got a home here at Three Birds as long as you want it, no matter what you decide." The tears were threatening to overflow, now. Still holding her hand, he turned and looked at his brother. "Doesn't she?" he asked softly. Emmett came forward. "Yes," he said. "Three Birds is your home, Sally, and I hope that you choose to stay. The children would miss you terribly if you left." Levi snorted. "Come on, Emmett. You'd better be honest with her, or I'll have a few choice words for you, that's for sure." Emmett chuckled. "I'll be honest with her. But you'd better leave, first." Levi gave Sally a final smile, a final squeeze of her hand. Then he was gone, headed back into the light and warmth of the dinner party, leaving her alone with Emmett. Alone with Emmett. He stepped forward and put out a hand. "Sally. I don't think he meant for you to feel pressured into anything," she said, faintly aware that she was babbling. "He only wanted me to feel that I was not obliged. That's why he announced it the way he did, hiding the fact that you were the one who wrote for a bride. He was trying to be kind, to both of us." "He was," acknowledged Emmett. "More kind than I've ever been to you, Sally. I owe you an apology. Will you hear it?" She closed her mouth, pressing her lips together to ward off any more babble. Trembling slightly, she nodded. He sighed. "I made a mistake in thinking that everything was going to be easy when I wrote for a mail-order bride. I loved my first wife, Anna was everything to me, and to our children. Of course, it wasn't going to be easy. But the second mistake was in thinking that I could simply expect a marriage of convenience, once you were here. I knew from the moment I saw you that you weren't just like everyone else. Your kindness, gentleness, the way my children warmed up to you from the start, the tender care you showed for them, as though they were your own, all of it was too much for a simple man to withstand. I had to fall in love with you. There was no two ways about it. But the longer our engagement stood, the more reluctant I was to acknowledge my feelings to myself. And to you, it was wrong of me." She shook her head. "You loved Anna," she said. "That isn't wrong." "No, but I love you, too, Sally. And to deny that is just as wrong as it would be to pretend that I never loved Anna." His grip on her hand tightened. "Can you accept that part of me will always love her?" "Of course I can," she said softly. "It makes you a better man, holding on to that love, as long as you have room for me in your heart, too." Then she was in his arms, in the blink of an eye, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and looked up into his eyes, dark and unfathomable under the soft summer skies. "That's where you belong," he said, and kissed her. They held to each other for a long, quiet moment, as the first stars began to show. Then at last, he stepped back, keeping his hold on her hand. "Well," he said, smiling, "I reckon the rest of the dinner party will wonder where we've got to." I'm half afraid that Levi will have told them already. No, I don't think so. It's our story to tell, Sally. He loves both of us too much to take that from us. He laughed. Besides, I can see him in the kitchen. He's looking for dessert. She slid her arm through his. It felt as though she were meant to be leaning on him, as though they were made for each other. I can't wait to see the look on the children's faces when we tell them, she whispered. He held her a little closer. Then why wait? Let's do it now. Carrying the happy news between them, like a gift to be given, they walked back into the light. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susanna Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susanna Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susanna Calloway Western romance.